This is Sarah Lloyd-Hughes, and she's an expert for inspirational speaking. And the way I came across Sarah was last year I was working with a colleague, and I told him that I wanted to improve and develop my public speaking. And he said that he knows a guy who was really struggling for quite some time. And then he went on to your 6-month inspirational speaking program, and apparently when he came back he had really transformed and improved, and I thought, wow, I'll check that out, and went onto your website, and here I am in the middle of the program. How long has it been? 3 months?
3 months so far, halfway there.
Yes. So yeah, and it's been so far it's been an amazing experience, and I thought I'd invite Sarah to talk to you about your work and what inspires you and the things you do, and maybe you can give our viewers a few tips and tricks as well for their own public speaking.
Great, yes.
So yeah, maybe we start with how did you get into it? How did it all start?
Sure, yeah. I'm like many people, I was terrified of public speaking when I first started. I avoided it for my whole early adult life. And like most things that you're afraid of, you put them off and you shove them to the background, and you forget or try to forget that they even existed. But at some point I was given the opportunity to stand for elections in what was at that moment my dream job.
Okay. Except
to become elected to get this dream job, I had to do a series of public speaking. It was a short 5-minute timed speeches, oh, and by the way, to 200 people. So I'd done none of that before, nothing to do with public speaking because I hated it so much. And I found myself outside the room, somehow having a speech running around in my mind, knowing that any second now I was going to have to go in and speak to this scary, scary room packed full of people. And I remember thinking, I have no idea whether anything's going to come out of my mouth. I have no idea whether I can do this. And I managed to get in the room. I didn't run away. I managed to start. I managed to get through that piece of public speaking. And it wasn't like suddenly I realised, haha, I'm a brilliant public speaker, right, and aren't I natural and powerful as it is. And what was really important that day was that I overcame my biggest possible fear. I was kind of mediocre as a speaker. Mm-hmm. I was all right. I got through it. Mm-hmm. But I got through my fear. And I got the job, which was great. Yeah. But the most important thing long term that happened to me that day was realising that I could get through it without dying. And yes, from there onwards, I started thinking, okay, look, if I want to be really good as a speaker, what does that take? So I started looking at the speakers who were really powerful, mm-hmm, versus the speakers who were kind of just all right. Mm-hmm. Then I found that there's a big difference between certain speakers who are professional looking, but you don't trust them. Mm-hmm. They seem to know the right techniques of putting your hand here and stand in this power posture and say this slightly manipulative phrase at this moment in time. But they were not the ones who I was inspired by. There's a type of speaker who seems to connect to the people in the room more, who seem to connect to themselves more, and who seem to be more interesting, more fascinating, and more able to stick in my mind after I had finished hearing them speak.
Which kind of speakers were there? Do you remember some names?
Yeah, I think the speakers now that I'm really inspired by are the typically TED talkers. They're brilliant. I love TED. Yeah. At the time, it was not necessarily the ones who were really in the public eye. So I remember thinking quite the opposite of politicians. You know, mm-hmm, that they were not what I wanted to be. But I remember watching certain people, I was involved a lot with social enterprise at the time, and I was watching 1 or 2 people in the social enterprise scene. I don't even remember their names now, but I remember the impact of seeing those people stand up and give a passionate story about their work in Africa, or here's why I set up this big social enterprise. And so there was something very personal about the way that those people were communicating. And it was quite different to the kind of all guns blazing motivational speaker types. They, for me, felt false. Yeah. And I started then connecting to other people around public speaking, and realised that other people felt the same, that public speaking is really nerve-wracking, and when you put on top of the fear within public speaking naturally, when you put on top of that, and now you have to pretend to be somebody that you're not, it becomes much more terrifying, and actually your abilities as a speaker become less powerful.
Yeah, and I think, so from my experience until now, this is really something that shapes your work, is this really strong focus on authenticity, the sort of warts and all approach, rather than having a certain way to stand, following certain formulas. I mean, you do cover some technical aspects as well, but I think it's only a medium to get to the truth, or to get to your true self, rather, and then get that out somehow.
You're a good student. I think there's almost two types of authenticity. One is the let me gush everything, and let me sort of use public speaking as a bit of my own therapy. And that's really not what I'm talking about. It's not that I feel absolutely terrified by this and I'm going to let the audience know everything about everything that I'm feeling. That's not what I see as authenticity. What I see as authenticity is speaking about something that you really believe in, and embodying that message. So speakers like Gandhi, for me, really represents what it is to be authentic and powerful. He was terrified as a young man of public speaking. There's stories of him being a lawyer in South Africa, and being absolutely terrified of standing up at court. And yet, look at the change he created through his very humble and unique style. And famously, I think he was often misquoted as saying you have to be the change you wish to see in the world, but the sentiment's important, that he and his message were exactly the same thing, that there's no difference between...
The congruency.
Yeah, absolutely congruent, and somehow from the heart. And that type of speaking is, I think, the most powerful that we can be. That even if you've got something slightly funny going on with your arms, if they're sort of doing something that's a bit odd, the audience won't focus on that unless there's nothing else more interesting going on. They will gravitate towards the speaker who is authentic, even if they've got a bit of nerves. And sometimes even because they've got a bit of nerves. Sometimes the seeing that the speaker has nerves helps the audience to see that it's real, that it actually means something, rather than you're just trotting out your usual stuff. So I think there's a big space in our world for more authentic communication, not only in public speaking, but all over the place, really.
Yeah, I second that. That's something I experience in my work, which is more focused on interpersonal communication in small groups, one-to-one in meetings. And I think it's very, my experience is that it's very enticing not to be authentic. I'm a little fearful, and maybe in the professional business world there's a risk of looking stupid, or making a fool out of yourself. So a lot of people build these layers around them, little protections, but the problem is the more layers they are, the harder it becomes to the listener, or to the receiver of the communication, to get through to them. So it sort of it's like curing the symptom, but the problem persists. So you get a short-term win sometimes in a meeting where you come off as superior maybe, but ultimately you lose the connection.
I very much agree. I think there's a lot of protective mechanisms that we put on top of our behaviours, and we are taught that you need to look impressive, and I think that's to the detriment of being engaging and also being memorable. The second you get a PowerPoint out at a corporate meeting, everyone internally sighs, I think, because they've seen that format thousands of times before. So the brain switches into this stereotyping mode that means that I'm looking at something, but I feel like I've seen it before, and I take in information less readily as a result. So what we end up with in the corporate world is communication that has no heart, communication that often isn't as memorable as it might be, and that hasn't really moved the audience, because perhaps, as you're suggesting, the audience isn't listening because the speaker isn't really talking fully to them. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in the business world as well to improve the degree to which our particularly senior figures, but I think it runs all the way through organisations, how they can communicate in a way that's inspiring.
Yeah, and what I found through your work, and it seems the group that I'm part of reflects that, is such a relief to go, I can be myself, I don't have to do all of that stuff, and I can still be really effective and sharp and precise and maybe even impressive, but without making all of that effort.
That's the key thing, that if we let go of the masks and the barriers and the slick looking suits and whatever else it is that we're protecting ourselves, hiding behind, we become better speakers. We manage to engage people more, we relax into ourselves, we show our personality. And if you look at some of the business greats, I mean, Steve Jobs was seen as held up as one of the shining examples of how to communicate in the business world. The public wanted to listen to him. People actually fought to get into his product launches because he was real and compelling and different in the way that he spoke, and not afraid to be passionate. So there is a lot of hiding behind barriers versus just relaxing and being yourself. And in some sense, this is a skill, as you pointed out. In some sense, there are some techniques that you can learn around public speaking, but it's also a way of self-acceptance. Like, actually, the leadership that you step into when you stand up to speak is fascinating. That part of public speaking really captivates me.